Trevor did not hesitate. He yanked the ring off Chioma's finger, so hard she gasped in pain. Before she could react, he grabbed the microphone from the priest's stand. The feedback screamed through the church, making guests flinch. "I'm not doing this," Trevor said. "I don't want to marry you, Chioma. I never did." Gasps filled the room. Chioma stood frozen at the altar, her heart pounding as the man she loved shattered her in front of everyone. Phone slowly rose. Whispers spread like smoke. At the back of the church, a tall man dressed in black watched her. Korean, broad-shouldered. His eyes stayed locked on Chioma, calm and focused, as if he had been expecting this. Trevor dropped the microphone and walked away. Chioma ran after him, tears blurring her vision. She was almost at the doors when a firm hand closed around her wrist. "Don't," the man in black said quietly. "Don't chase him." Chioma tried to pull her wrist free, but his grip held firm. "Let me go," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "I have to. I need to." "No, you don't," the man said, and there was a certainty in his tone that cut through the panic that was threatening to drown her. "You don't need to chase a man who just humiliated you in front of 300 people. You don't need to beg him to stay. You need to let him go." "Who are you?" Chioma demanded, her voice rising with hysteria. "Why are you stopping me?" The man did not answer. Instead, he released her wrist and turned to face the church. The entire congregation was watching them now, their faces a blur of shock and curiosity, and poorly concealed excitement at the drama unfolding before them. The man walked past Chioma, moving with a fluid grace that made people shift in their seats without even realizing they were doing it. He walked down the aisle toward the altar, and Chioma found herself following him, drawn along in his wake like she had no choice in the matter. He climbed the steps to the altar, and the priest, who had been standing frozen in shock this entire time, took a step backward. The man stood in the exact spot where Trevor had been standing just minutes before, and he turned to look at Chioma. He held out his hand to her, palm up, an invitation. Chioma stared at him, her mind completely blank, unable to process what was happening. This stranger, this man she did not know, was standing at her altar and holding out his hand like he had every right to be there. "Come here," he said quietly, and something in his voice made her obey. She walked up the steps on shaking legs, her bare feet silent on the marble, and she placed her hand in his. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that was at odds with the controlled power she could feel radiating from him. He turned to face the church, keeping her hand in his, and when he spoke, his voice carried easily to every corner of the building without him having to raise it. "I will marry her," he said, and the words fell into the silence like stones into still water. For a moment, no one reacted. The entire church seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if this was real, or if they were all experiencing some kind of collective hallucination. And then the doors at the back of the church burst open again, and Trevor came storming back in. His face was red, his eyes wild, and he pointed at the altar with a shaking hand. "What the hell is going on?" Trevor shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Who the hell are you?" The man beside Chioma did not even glance in Trevor's direction. He kept his eyes on the priest, who was standing off to the side looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "You have a ceremony to perform," the man said to the priest, and his tone was polite but left absolutely no room for argument. "Perform it." Trevor started marching down the aisle, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You can't do this. She's my fiancée. We were supposed to get married." The man finally turned to look at Trevor, and something in his expression made Trevor stop in his tracks halfway down the aisle. It was not anger. It was not aggression. It was something colder and more dangerous, a kind of calm certainty that suggested this man was not someone you wanted to cross. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried through the church with a weight that made everyone lean forward to hear. "You threw the ring at her," the man said, his words precise and measured. "You announced to everyone here that you did not want to marry her. You walked away. You made your choice. Now I am making mine." Trevor's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly trying to think of something to say that would change the situation. But before he could speak, the man took a step forward, positioning himself between Chioma and Trevor in a way that was unmistakably protective. He did not touch Trevor. He did not threaten him. He simply stood there, a wall between them, and the message was clear. "You will not get near her. I suggest you leave," the man said to Trevor, and there was something in his tone that made it very clear this was not a suggestion at all. Now, Trevor looked at the man, then at Chioma, then back at the man. She saw something flicker across his face, something that looked almost like fear, and then he turned and walked back down the aisle. This time, he did not stop. He walked straight out of the church, and his groomsmen followed him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the sound echoed through the church with a finality that made Chioma's chest tighten. The man turned back to Chioma, and his expression softened just slightly. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb, the gesture so tender that it made her breath hitch in her throat. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Chioma stared at him. She should say no. She should tell him that nothing about this was all right, that her entire life had just fallen apart in front of everyone she knew, that a stranger had just announced he was going to marry her, and she had no idea who he was or why he was doing this. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was a whisper. "Who are you?" "My name is Shin Dae-young," he said, and his dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "And I am going to marry you, if you will let me." "Why?" The word was barely audible, but he heard it. "Because you deserve better than what just happened to you," Shin Dae-young said simply. "Because no one should have to stand at this altar alone. And because I can give you a way out of this moment that does not end with you being the woman everyone pities." Chioma felt fresh tears slide down her cheeks, but these felt different from the ones before. These felt less like despair and more like something else, something she could not quite name. She looked at this stranger, this man who had walked into her wedding and offered to save her from her own humiliation, and she made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice. Maybe it was insane, but it was hers to make. "Okay," she whispered. Shin Dae-young's hand tightened around hers, just slightly, and then he turned to the priest. "Proceed." The priest looked like he was going to have a heart attack. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking as he clutched the Bible to his chest. I don't know if I can do this," he stammered. "This is highly irregular. I don't even know who you are. There are procedures, licenses, counseling requirements." Shin Dae-young reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to the priest, who took it with trembling fingers and opened it. Inside was what looked like an official marriage license, already filled out and signed. The priest's eyes went wide as he read it, and then he looked up at Shin Dae-young with an expression that was equal parts shock and fear. "How did you?" The priest started to ask, but Shin Dae-young cut him off. "Everything you need is there," Shin Dae-young said. "Everything is legal. Everything is in order. All you have to do is perform the ceremony." The priest looked at Chioma, his eyes searching her face as if looking for some sign that she was being coerced, that she needed help. Chioma took a shaky breath and nodded. She did not know what she was agreeing to. She did not know what would happen after this. But she knew that she could not walk out of this church as the woman Trevor had abandoned. She would not give him that power over her. The priest swallowed hard and opened his Bible. His voice shook as he began to speak, rushing through the traditional words of the ceremony like he wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. Chioma barely heard him. She was too focused on the man standing beside her, on the way he held her hand like it was something precious, on the way he stood between her and the rest of the church like a shield. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the congregation on them, could feel the weight of their shock and curiosity and judgment. But somehow, with Shin Dae-young beside her, it felt bearable. "Do you, Shin Dae-young, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the priest asked, his voice cracking on the words. "I do," Shin Dae-young said, and there was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. Just calm certainty. The priest turned to Chioma, and she saw the question in his eyes again, the concern, the uncertainty. "Do you, Chioma, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Chioma looked at Shin Dae-young. She looked at his face, at the calm strength in his dark eyes, at the way he was standing beside her like he had every intention of staying there. She thought about Trevor, about the way he had thrown the ring at her, and walked away without a second glance. She thought about the cameras and the laughter and the humiliation. And then she thought about the way this stranger had stopped her from chasing after a man who did not want her, the way he had offered her a way out, the way he was looking at her right now like she was worth something. "I do," she said, and her voice was stronger than she expected it to be. The priest closed his Bible with a snap that seemed too loud in the quiet church. "Then by the power vested in me by the state and by God, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He looked at Shin Dae-young with wide eyes. "You may kiss the bride." Shin Dae-young turned to face Chioma fully. He released her hand and brought both of his hands up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her want to cry all over again. His thumbs brushed away the tears that were still sliding down her cheeks, and then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was a chaste kiss, respectful and tender, and somehow it felt more intimate than anything else could have been in that moment. When he pulled back, he looked down at her with those dark eyes, and he said quietly, so quietly that only she could hear, "You are safe now. I promise you that." Chioma did not know why, but she believed him. Shin Dae-young took her hand again and turned to face the church. The congregation was still sitting in stunned silence, still processing what had just happened. He did not smile at them. He did not acknowledge their shock. He simply began to walk down the aisle, and he brought Chioma with him. She walked beside him on bare feet, her massive wedding dress rustling around her legs with every step, her hand gripped tightly in his. As they passed the pews, she saw faces she had known her entire life staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to horror to poorly concealed fascination. She saw her mother reaching out toward her, tears streaming down her face. She saw her father standing rigid and red-faced, looking like he wanted to grab Shin Dae-young and demand answers. She saw her bridesmaids huddled together, their mouths hanging open, their eyes wide. And she saw the cameras. Everywhere. Phones held high, pointed at her and Shin Dae-young, recording every moment of this bizarre turn of events. She knew that within hours, maybe even minutes, this would be all over social media. Everyone would see what had happened. Everyone would have an opinion. Everyone would judge her for what she had just done. But as Shin Dae-young led her toward the doors at the back of the church, his hand warm and steady around hers, Chioma realized something. She did not care. Let them talk. Let them judge. Let them post their videos and their hot takes and their commentary. Because for the first time since Trevor had pulled that ring off her finger, she did not feel like she was drowning. She felt like someone had thrown her a lifeline, and she had grabbed it with both hands. They reached the doors, and Shin Dae-young pushed them open with his free hand. Sunlight poured in, warm and bright, and Chioma had to squint against it. Outside, a sleek black car was waiting at the curb, its engine already running. A man in a dark suit stood beside the open rear door, his hands clasped in front of him and his face expressionless. Shin Dae-young led Chioma down the steps of the church and across the sidewalk to the car. He helped her inside, his hand on her elbow guiding her as she gathered up the voluminous skirt of her dress and slid across the leather seat. Then he climbed in after her, and the door closed with a heavy sound that seemed to seal them off from the rest of the world. The car began to move immediately. Chioma turned to look out the back window and saw people spilling out of the church, saw them standing on the steps and pointing at the car as it drove away. She saw her father pushing through the crowd, his mouth open as he shouted something that she could not hear. She saw cameras flashing, saw phones held high to capture video of the car disappearing down the street. And then the church was behind them, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a white speck in the distance. And then it was gone entirely. Chioma turned back around and pressed her hands to her face. Her whole body was shaking. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was starting to drain away, and in its place was a bone-deep exhaustion that made her want to curl up into a ball and never move again. She took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself down, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had just married a complete stranger. She had just left her entire family and all of her friends standing in a church without any explanation. She had just gotten into a car with a man she did not know and driven away to a destination she could not even begin to guess. "Where are we going?" she asked, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, high and thin and on the verge of breaking. Shin Dae-young was sitting beside her, his hands resting on his knees, his posture relaxed despite the insanity of what had just occurred. He looked at her, and his expression was calm and steady, exactly the same as it had been in the church. "Somewhere you can breathe," he said. "Somewhere no one will bother you for a while." Chioma shook her head. The whole thing felt surreal, like she was watching it happen to someone else. "I don't understand any of this. I don't understand why you did what you did. I don't understand who you are or what you want from me. I do not want anything from you," Shin Dae-young said, and his tone was matter-of-fact, as if they were discussing the weather instead of the bizarre circumstances of their sudden marriage. "I saw what was happening, and I made a choice. That is all. That is not all, Chioma said, and she could hear the edge of hysteria creeping into her voice. People don't just walk into churches and marry random strangers. That's not something people do. There has to be a reason. There has to be something you want. Shin Dae-young was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the city passing by, at the buildings and the cars and the people going about their normal lives, completely unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, and there was something in it that sounded almost like sadness. I know what it feels like to be humiliated in front of people who are supposed to care about you, he said. I know what it feels like to have everyone watching and no one helping. I did not want that for you. So I helped. Chioma stared at him. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand more answers, but something about the way he said those words stopped her. There was a weight to them, a history that he was not sharing, but that she could feel nonetheless. Before we continue, please do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this story is about to change in ways nobody expects. The car turned a corner and began to slow down. Chioma looked out the window and saw that they were pulling up in front of a tall building, all glass and steel and modern architecture. The kind of building that screamed money and power and influence. The driver got out and opened the door for them, and Shin Dae-young stepped out first. He turned and offered Chioma his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it. He helped her out of the car, and she stood on the sidewalk in her wedding dress and bare feet, feeling completely out of place and utterly lost. Shin Dae-young led her into the building, through a lobby that was all marble and expensive-looking art, and over to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. He swiped the card, and the doors opened immediately. They stepped inside, and he pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator began to rise, and Chioma watched the numbers climb higher and higher until they reached the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into an apartment that was bigger than any place Chioma had ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, all clean lines and neutral colors. Everything about the space screamed wealth and taste, and a life that was completely foreign to her. Shin Dae-young walked into the apartment, and Chioma followed, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. She felt like she was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. She could not tell which. A woman appeared from one of the side rooms, older and Korean, with her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She looked at Chioma with surprise, her eyes widening as she took in the wedding dress and the tear-stained face. And then she looked at Shin Dae-young and said something in Korean, her voice fast and concerned. Shin Dae-young responded in the same language, his tone calm and reassuring. The woman nodded, still looking uncertain, and then she turned to Chioma and gave her a small, tentative smile. "This is Mrs. Kong," Shin Dae-young said, switching back to English. "She manages my home. She will help you with anything you need." Mrs. Kong stepped forward and gestured toward the hallway, clearly indicating that Chioma should follow her. Chioma looked at Shin Dae-young, suddenly panicked at the thought of being separated from the only person in this entire situation who seemed to know what was going on. "Where is she taking me?" Chioma asked. "To a room where you can change and rest," Shin Dae-young said. "You have been through a great deal today. You need time to process. And what are you going to do?" "I am going to make some calls. There are things that need to be handled." Chioma wanted to ask what things, wanted to demand that he explain everything to her right now, but the exhaustion was catching up with her again. Her legs felt like they could barely hold her weight. Her head was pounding. Her eyes burned from all the crying. She nodded, and Mrs. Kong gently took her by the elbow and guided her down the hallway. Chioma looked back over her shoulder at Shin Dae-young, and he was standing in the middle of the living room watching her go, his hands in his pockets and his expression unreadable. Mrs. Kong led her to a bedroom that was easily twice the size of the one Chioma had shared with Trevor. There was a king-sized bed with crisp white linens, a sitting area with a comfortable-looking couch, and a door that led to what Chioma assumed was a bathroom. Mrs. Kong opened the closet and pulled out a soft-looking pair of sweatpants and a loose t-shirt. She set them on the bed and then mimed taking off the wedding dress, clearly indicating that Chioma should change. Then she pointed to the bathroom and mimed taking a shower. Chioma nodded. Mrs. Kong gave her another small smile and then left, closing the door quietly behind her. Chioma stood in the middle of the room, alone for the first time since the ceremony, and she felt the full weight of everything that had happened crash down on her. Her knees buckled, and she sank down onto the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the comforter so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, her mind completely blank. And then finally the tears came again. They came hard and fast and endless, and she let them. She cried for Trevor and the life she had thought they were going to have. She cried for the embarrassment and the humiliation of having him throw a ring at her in front of everyone. She cried for the confusion and the fear of not knowing what was going to happen next. And she cried because a stranger had shown her more kindness in one moment than the man she had loved had shown her in 3 years. Eventually, the tears stopped. Chioma wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up. She unzipped the wedding dress and let it fall to the floor in a heap of white silk and broken dreams. She left it there and walked into the bathroom. It was huge and luxurious, with a walk-in shower that had multiple shower heads and a bathtub that could easily fit 2 people. She turned on the shower and stepped under the hot water, letting it wash away the makeup and the tears and the feeling of being on display. She stood there until the water started to run cold, and then she turned it off and dried herself with a towel that was softer than anything she had ever felt. She put on the sweatpants and t-shirt that Mrs. Kong had left for her, and they fit perfectly, which was strange and a little unsettling. How had Shin Dae-young known her size? How had he had clothes ready for her? The questions swirled in her mind, but she pushed them away. She was too tired to deal with them right now. She walked back into the bedroom and climbed into the bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The sheets smelled clean and fresh, like laundry detergent, and something else she could not quite identify. She closed her eyes, expecting to lie awake for hours replaying the day's events in her mind. But instead she fell asleep almost immediately, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been threatening to overwhelm her since the moment Trevor had pulled that ring off her finger and thrown it at her feet. When Chioma woke up, the room was dark. She sat up in bed, disoriented and confused, and it took her a moment to remember where she was. The events of the day came flooding back, and she groaned and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. It had not been a dream. Trevor really had humiliated her at the altar. A stranger really had married her. She really was in his apartment, in his bed, wearing his clothes. She looked at the clock on the nightstand and saw that it was almost 8 in the evening. She had slept for hours. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten anything since breakfast, and that had been over 12 hours ago. She got out of bed and padded over to the door, opening it cautiously. The hallway was lit by soft lights embedded in the baseboards, and she could hear the faint sound of voices coming from somewhere deeper in the apartment. She followed the sound and found herself back in the living room. Shin Dae-young was sitting on the couch with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Korean. He looked up when she entered, and he immediately ended the call and stood up. "You are awake," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," Chioma admitted. Her voice was hoarse from all the crying. "And I'm starving." Shin Dae-young nodded. "Mrs. Kong made dinner. I told her to keep it warm in case you woke up hungry." He led her into the kitchen, which was sleek and modern with state-of-the-art appliances and a long island in the center. Mrs. Kong was there, and she smiled when she saw Chioma. She immediately began pulling dishes out of the oven and setting them on the counter. There was rice and some kind of stew and grilled vegetables and kimchi. The smells made Chioma's mouth water, and she realized just how hungry she was. Mrs. Kong filled a plate and handed it to her, gesturing for her to sit at the island. Chioma sat, and Shin Dae-young sat beside her. Mrs. Kong filled a plate for him as well, and then she excused herself and left the kitchen, giving them privacy. Chioma ate in silence for a few minutes, and Shin Dae-young did the same. The food was delicious, rich and flavorful, and exactly what she needed. When she had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger, she set down her fork and looked at him. "I need you to explain what is going on," she said. "And I need you to tell me the truth. No more cryptic answers. No more vague statements. I need to know who you are and why you did what you did, and what happens next." Shin Dae-young set down his own fork and turned to face her. He looked at her for a long moment, as if he was deciding how much to tell her, and then he sighed. "My name is Shin Dae-young, and I run a significant portion of the business operations in this city." "What kind of business operations?" "The kind that exist in the spaces between legal and illegal. The kind that most people prefer not to know about." Chioma's stomach dropped. "You're telling me you're a criminal?" I am telling you that I operate outside the boundaries of what most people consider acceptable, Shin Dae-young said. I have investments in legitimate businesses, but I also have interests in things like gambling, imports that do not always go through proper channels, and financial arrangements that would not hold up to close scrutiny. I employ people who ensure that my interests are protected, sometimes through means that are not entirely peaceful. You're in the mafia. Shin Dae-young tilted his head slightly, considering the word. That term is not quite accurate, but it is close enough for the purposes of this conversation. Yes. Chioma pushed her plate away, suddenly not hungry anymore. And you thought it was a good idea to marry me? To drag me into your world? I thought it was a good idea to keep you from being destroyed in front of everyone you know, Shin Dae-young said, and there was a sharpness to his tone that had not been there before. I thought it was a good idea to give you an option that did not involve you walking out of that church as the woman everyone would pity. What happens next is up to you. What do you mean, up to me? I mean that you can leave whenever you want. I will not stop you. I will arrange for the marriage to be annulled quietly. You can go back to your life, and I will make sure that the story that gets told is one that does not paint you as the victim. Or you can stay for a while. You can let the dust settle. You can figure out what you want to do next without the pressure of everyone watching and judging. The choice is yours. Chioma stared at him. She had expected him to tell her that she was stuck, that she had no choice, that she was now part of his world whether she liked it or not. But he was giving her an out. He was telling her that she could walk away. The fact that he was offering that made her trust him, just a little bit. Why would you let me stay? She asked. What do you get out of it? Shin Dae-young looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that looked almost vulnerable. Because I know what it is like to have your life fall apart in front of people who claim to care about you, he said quietly. And because I do not want you to have to face that alone. Chioma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes again, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough for one day. She took a deep breath and made a decision. I'll stay, she said. Just for a little while. Just until I figure out what I'm going to do. Shin Dae-young nodded. That is acceptable. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Chioma asked, What happens now? Now you rest. Tomorrow we will deal with the fallout. Your family will want answers. The media will want a story. We will give them something that satisfies their curiosity without revealing too much. And what about Trevor? Shin Dae-young's expression hardened. What about him? He came back to the church. He saw what happened. He's going to want to explain or apologize or something. If he does, he will not get far. What does that mean? Shin Dae-young looked at her, and there was something cold and dangerous in his eyes that made Chioma's breath catch. It means that he made his choice when he threw that ring at you. It means that if he comes near you again, he will regret it. You are under my protection now, Chioma. No one hurts you. Not him. Not anyone. The way he said her name, with that slight accent that softened the edges of the syllables, sent a shiver down her spine. She did not know if it was fear or something else, but she felt it all the same. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and Shin Dae-young stood up. He picked up their plates and carried them to the sink, rinsing them off with an ease that suggested he was not a man who relied entirely on staff to take care of him. You should get more rest, he said without turning around. Tomorrow will be a long day. Chioma stood up as well. Where will you sleep? In my room. It is down the hall. If you need anything, Mrs. Kong is in the guest quarters on the other side of the apartment. Do not hesitate to ask. He turned to face her, and they stood there in the kitchen looking at each other. Chioma felt like there was something she should say, something that would adequately express the strange mix of gratitude and confusion and fear that she was feeling, but she could not find the words. So instead she just nodded and turned to leave. She made it to the doorway before Shin Dae-young's voice stopped her. Chioma. She turned back. Yes, you are safe here. I promise you that. She believed him. She did not know why, but she did. She gave him a small smile, and then she walked back to the bedroom and climbed into bed. This time, sleep did not come as easily. She lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that was still to come. She thought about Trevor and the way he had looked at her with such cold indifference when he threw that ring. She thought about her family and how they must be worrying about her. She thought about Shin Dae-young and the way he had walked into that church like he owned it, like he had every right to be there. She thought about the way he had stopped her from chasing Trevor, the way he had stood between them, the way he had looked at her like she mattered. And as she lay there in the dark, in the home of a man she barely knew, Chioma realized that for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel alone. The next morning, Chioma woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. She had forgotten to close the curtains the night before, and now the room was bathed in golden light that made everything look warm and inviting. She got out of bed and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread out below her. From this high up, the world looked peaceful and orderly, the chaos of the streets reduced to tiny moving dots that could not touch her up here in this glass tower. There was a soft knock on the door, and then Mrs. Kong entered carrying a tray. She set it down on the small table in the sitting area, and Chioma saw that it held a pot of coffee, a plate of toast and eggs, and a glass of orange juice. Mrs. Kong smiled and gestured to the tray, and Chioma thanked her. Mrs. Kong nodded and left, and Chioma sat down to eat. The food was simple but good, and the coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed to wake up fully. As she was finishing her breakfast, there was another knock on the door. This time it was Shin Dae-young. He was dressed in a suit again, dark gray this time, and he looked like he had been awake for hours. His hair was perfectly styled, his tie was straight, and there was not a wrinkle anywhere on his clothing. He looked every inch the powerful businessman, and it was hard to reconcile this polished version of him with the man who had walked into a church and upended her entire life. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," Chioma said. "What's happening today? Your phone has been ringing nonstop since yesterday. Your family is understandably concerned. I think it would be a good idea for you to call them and let them know that you are safe." Chioma's stomach clenched. She had not even thought about her phone. It was probably still in the bridal suite at the church, along with all of her other belongings. "I don't have my phone," she said. "I had one of my people retrieve it," Shin Dae-young said, and he pulled her phone out of his pocket and handed it to her. "Along with your purse and your other personal items." Chioma took the phone from him, and when she turned it on, the screen lit up with hundreds of notifications. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails. Most of them were from her mother, her father, her sisters, her friends. There were also several from Trevor. She felt a surge of anger when she saw his name, and she deleted his messages without reading them. "I don't know what to tell them," she said, looking up at Shin Dae-young. "Tell them the truth. That you are safe. That you needed time away from everything. That you will speak with them when you are ready. They're going to want to know where I am. They're going to want to come and see me. Then tell them that you are staying with a friend and that you need space. You do not owe them more than that right now." Chioma took a deep breath and nodded. She dialed her mother's number, and it rang only once before her mother picked up. Her mother's voice was frantic, high-pitched, and desperate. "Chioma. Oh my God, Chioma, where are you? Are you okay? Who is that man? What happened?" "Mama, I'm fine," Chioma said, and she tried to keep her voice calm and steady even though her heart was racing. "I'm safe. I'm staying with a friend." "What friend? Who is he? Why did he take you? We've been so worried. Your father wanted to call the police. We thought you had been kidnapped." "I wasn't kidnapped, Mama. I chose to leave. I needed to get away from everything." "But you married him. You married a complete stranger. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that I didn't want to walk out of that church as the woman Trevor humiliated in front of everyone," Chioma said, and her voice was sharper than she intended. "I was thinking that I needed someone to stand beside me, and he did." Her mother was silent for a moment, and then she said more quietly, "Who is he, Chioma? Where did he come from?" "His name is Shin Dae-young." "That's all you need to know right now." "That's all I need to know?" "Chioma, you married him. We deserve to know more than his name." "Maybe you did," Chioma said. "Maybe you deserve to know more before I married him. But maybe someone also should have stopped Trevor from throwing that ring at me. Maybe someone should have come up to the altar and stood with me. But no one did, Mama. So he did. And now I'm here, and I'm safe, and I need you to trust me." Her mother started crying. Chioma could hear the sobs through the phone, and she felt her own throat tighten with emotion. "I'm sorry, Mama," she said softly. "I'm sorry for worrying you. But I need some time. I'll call you again soon, okay?" She ended the call before her mother could respond. Her hands were shaking, and she set the phone down on the table. Shin Dae-young was still standing in the doorway, watching her with that same unreadable expression. "That was harder than I expected," Chioma said. "It will get easier." "Will it? Eventually." Chioma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know my family." "No. But I know families. They will be angry and confused for a while, but they will come around. Especially when they see that you are safe and that you are making your own choices. And if they don't, then that is their loss. Chioma looked at him, at the certainty in his eyes, and she wondered what his own family was like. She wondered if he had people who cared about him, who worried about him, or if he was as alone as he seemed. She wanted to ask, but something about his demeanor told her that he would not answer, at least not yet. What happens now? She asked instead. Now we deal with the media. Your wedding was a public event, and what happened has already started to spread. There are pictures online, videos of me walking into the church. People are asking questions. We need to control the narrative before it controls us. How do we do that? We give them a story, one that is close enough to the truth that it feels believable, but vague enough that it does not expose anything we do not want exposed. And what story is that? Shin Dae-young stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He walked over to the sitting area and sat down in the chair across from her. We tell them that we knew each other before, that we met through mutual acquaintances, that we had been seeing each other quietly, and when your fiancé decided to leave, I made a choice. We play it as a whirlwind romance, something impulsive but not entirely out of nowhere. People are going to ask why I was marrying Trevor if I was seeing you. Then we say that you and I had a falling out, that you thought it was over, that Trevor was a rebound. And when he left you, I realized I could not let you go. Chioma shook her head. That's a lot of lying. It is a lot of protecting. There is a difference. Is there? Shin Dae-young leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Chioma, the truth is that I walked into that church because I could not stand to watch what was happening to you. The truth is that I did not know you, but I knew enough to know that you did not deserve what he was doing to you. The truth is that I made a choice in a moment, and I do not regret it. But if we tell people that truth, they will not understand. They will dig. They will ask questions. They will try to find angles and motives and reasons. And in doing so, they will make your life a living hell. So we give them a story that they can accept, and we move forward. Chioma bit her lip. She hated the idea of lying, but she also understood what he was saying. The media would not let this go. They would hound her, dig into her life, turn her into a spectacle all over again. If giving them a simple story meant they would leave her alone, maybe it was worth it. Okay, she said. We'll do it your way. Shin Dae-young nodded. I have already drafted a statement. I will release it this afternoon. You do not have to do anything except stay here and stay safe. For how long? As long as you need. Chioma looked around the room, at the expensive furniture and the beautiful view and the life that was so far removed from her own. I can't stay here forever. I am not asking you to. I am asking you to stay until things calm down. Until you have had time to figure out what you want. And then, when you are ready, you can go. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he was being honest, that he really did not want anything from her except to help. But she had spent 3 years trusting Trevor, and look where that had gotten her. She did not know if she could trust her own judgment anymore. Why are you being so kind to me? She asked quietly. Shin Dae-young looked at her, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker across his face. Sadness, maybe. Or regret. But it was gone so quickly that she might have imagined it. Because kindness is rare, he said. And because I can. He stood up and walked to the door. Rest. Read. Watch television. Do whatever you need to do to relax. I will handle everything else. And then he was gone, and Chioma was alone again with her thoughts and her phone and the strange new reality she had somehow found herself living. She picked up the phone and opened social media, even though she knew she would regret it. And she did. The wedding was everywhere. Videos of Trevor throwing the ring, announcing he did not want to marry her. Videos of Shin Dae-young walking in. Pictures of them at the altar. The comments were brutal. People were calling her desperate, pathetic, a gold digger. They were speculating about who Shin Dae-young was and why he had done what he did. Some people were defending her, saying that Trevor was cruel and that she deserved better, but they were drowned out by the negativity. Chioma closed the app and threw her phone onto the couch. She felt sick. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to go back in time and never meet Trevor, never fall in love, never agree to marry him. But she could not do any of those things. All she could do was sit here in this beautiful apartment and wait for the world to move on to the next scandal while she tried to piece together what was left of her life. Days passed, and Chioma settled into a strange routine. She woke up. She ate breakfast that Mrs. Kong brought her. She spent the day reading or watching movies or staring out the window. Shin Dae-young was gone most of the time, handling business that he did not explain and she did not ask about. When he was home, he kept his distance, giving her space, respecting her need to process everything. They ate dinner together sometimes, and they made small talk about safe topics like the weather and the food and the books she was reading. It was polite and cordial and deeply unsatisfying, but Chioma did not know how to bridge the gap between them. One evening, about a week after the wedding, Shin Dae-young came home earlier than usual. Chioma was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, when he walked in. He looked tired, more tired than she had ever seen him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his tie was loosened, and he moved with a heaviness that suggested the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. "Long day?" Chioma asked. "You could say that." He walked over to the bar in the corner and poured himself a drink. Whiskey straight. He downed it in one gulp and poured another. Chioma watched him with concern. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine. You don't look fine." He turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. He looked vulnerable in a way that she had not seen before, like the armor he wore had slipped just a little bit. "There are parts of my life that are not easy," he said. "Things that I wish I could change but cannot. Today reminded me of that." Chioma set down her book and stood up. She walked over to him, closing the distance between them slowly. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." "Okay." They stood there in silence, and Chioma could feel the tension radiating off him. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer some kind of comfort, but she did not know if that would be welcome. Before she could decide, Shin Dae-young spoke again. "Your ex-fiancé came to see me today." Chioma's blood ran cold. "Trevor?" "Yes. He showed up at my office. He wanted to talk." "What did he say?" "He said that he made a mistake. That he wants you back. That he will do whatever it takes to fix things." Chioma felt a surge of anger so strong that it made her hands shake. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that it was not his choice. I told him that you are your own person, and that if you wanted to see him, you would reach out. And then I told him that if he came near you again without your permission, I would make sure he regretted it." "Did he listen?" "He did after I had 2 of my men escort him out of the building." Chioma laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh she had let out in days. "I wish I could have seen that." Shin Dae-young smiled just a little. It was satisfying. They stood there looking at each other, and something shifted in the air between them. The polite distance that had been there evaporated, replaced by something warmer and more intimate. Chioma felt her pulse quicken, felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with anger or fear. "Thank you," she said softly, "for protecting me, for giving me this space, for everything. You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have just walked away. But you didn't." Shin Dae-young reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and the gesture was so gentle that it made her want to cry. "I told you," he said quietly. "You are safe with me. I meant it." Chioma leaned into his touch just slightly, and she saw his eyes darken with something that looked like desire. Her breath caught. She had not thought about Shin Dae-young in that way, had been too caught up in her own grief and confusion to consider him as anything other than her protector. But now, standing here with his hand against her cheek and his eyes locked on hers, she felt something stir inside her that she had not felt in a long time. "Dae-young," she whispered, and his name felt strange and intimate on her lips. He pulled his hand away abruptly and stepped back, and the loss of his touch felt like a physical blow. "I should go," he said, and his voice was rough. "I have things to take care of." Before she could respond, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there alone and confused and aching in a way that had nothing to do with Trevor and everything to do with the man who had just walked away. Chioma did not sleep well that night. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, kept wondering if she had imagined the desire in his eyes, kept questioning whether she was ready to feel anything for anyone after what Trevor had done to her. When morning came, she was exhausted and on edge, and she dragged herself out of bed with a sense of dread about facing Shin Dae-young again. But when she went into the kitchen for breakfast, he was not there. Mrs. Kong told her, in broken English and lots of hand gestures, that he had left early for business and would not be back until late. Chioma felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She spent the day alone, trying to distract herself, but her thoughts kept returning to him. To the way he had looked at her. To the way he had touched her. To the way he had walked away. That evening, just as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Chioma's phone rang. It was an unknown number, and she almost did not answer, but something made her pick up. Hello, Chioma. It's Trevor. Her stomach dropped. How did you get this number? That doesn't matter. I need to talk to you. I need to see you. No, please. Just give me 5 minutes. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand why. I don't care why, Trevor. You made your choice. I made a mistake. I panicked. I got scared. But I love you, Chioma. I still love you. And I know you still love me too. Chioma felt tears sting her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of anger. You don't know anything about what I feel, she said, her voice shaking. You threw a ring at me in front of everyone. You humiliated me. You broke me. And now you want to waltz back into my life like nothing happened. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make it right. Just tell me where you are. Let me come talk to you in person. No. And if you contact me again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking so badly that she almost dropped the phone. She sat down on the couch and tried to calm her breathing, tried to stop the panic that was rising in her chest. Trevor knew her number. Trevor was trying to find her. What if he showed up here? What if he somehow figured out where she was? As if summoned by her fear, the door to the penthouse opened, and Shin Dae-young walked in. He took one look at her face and immediately crossed the room to kneel in front of her. What happened? He asked, his voice urgent. Trevor called me. He wants to see me. He wants to make things right. Shin Dae-young's expression hardened. How did he get your number? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. I will find out. He pulled out his own phone and made a call, speaking rapidly in Korean. Chioma could not understand the words, but she could hear the anger in his tone. When he hung up, he looked at her again. Change your number. I will have someone handle it first thing in the morning. And I will make sure Trevor understands that contacting you again is not an option. What are you going to do to him? Nothing that he does not deserve. Chioma grabbed his hand, and he looked down at their joined hands in surprise. Don't hurt him, she said. Please. He's not worth it. Shin Dae-young's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I will not hurt him, but I will make sure he stays away. Thank you. They stayed like that for a moment, him kneeling in front of her and her holding his hand. And then Shin Dae-young stood up and pulled her to her feet as well. Come, he said. Let's get you something to eat. You look pale. He led her into the kitchen, and Mrs. Kong appeared as if by magic to prepare food. They sat at the island together, and Shin Dae-young stayed close, as if he was afraid to let her out of his sight. Chioma was grateful for his presence, for the solid weight of him beside her, for the sense of safety that he radiated. Can I ask you something? She said after they had been eating in silence for a few minutes. Of course. Why did you walk away last night? When we were in the living room, Shin Dae-young set down his fork. He did not look at her. Because you are vulnerable right now. Because you are hurting. And because I did not want to take advantage of that. What if I wanted you to? He turned to look at her then, and his eyes were dark and intense. Did you? Chioma's heart pounded. She should say no. She should tell him that she was not ready, that it was too soon, that she needed more time. But the truth was that she was tired of being careful. She was tired of protecting herself. She was tired of being alone. Yes, she whispered. Shin Dae-young's breath hitched. He reached out and cupped her face with both hands, and his touch was gentle and reverent. Chioma, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. I do not want to be a rebound. I do not want to be the man you turn to because you are trying to forget him. If this happens, I need it to be because you want me, not because you are running from him. Chioma looked into his eyes, and she saw the truth there. He wanted her, but he was holding himself back, giving her the choice, making sure she was certain. It was the most respect anyone had ever shown her, and it broke something open inside her chest. I'm not running from him, she said. I'm choosing you. Shin Dae-young closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was trying to compose himself, and then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. Are you sure? Yes. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kiss he had given her at the altar. This was deep and hungry and full of all the restraint he had been holding back. Chioma kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. He lifted her off the stool and set her on the counter, stepping between her legs, and his hands moved to her waist, holding her steady. She wrapped her legs around him, and he groaned against her mouth, the sound sending a shiver of desire through her entire body. They broke apart, both of them breathing hard, and Shin Dae-young rested his forehead against hers again. "We should stop," he said, but his hands were still on her waist, his fingers digging into her skin in a way that suggested he did not really want to stop at all. "Why?" "Because if we do not stop now, I will not be able to stop at all." Chioma smiled. "Then don't stop." Shin Dae-young let out a shaky breath, and then he kissed her again, and this time there was no holding back. He lifted her off the counter, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, and he carried her out of the kitchen and down the hallway to his bedroom. He kicked the door shut behind them and laid her down on the bed, and then he pulled back to look at her. "Are you sure?" he asked again, his voice rough. "I'm sure." And so he showed her, with his hands and his mouth and his body, exactly how much he wanted her. He was gentle and patient and attentive, and by the time they finally came together, Chioma was trembling with need. It was different from anything she had ever experienced with Trevor. It was more. It was better. It felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, their bodies slick with sweat, and their breathing slowly returning to normal. Shin Dae-young held her close, his arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she might disappear. Chioma rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time since Trevor had thrown that ring at her, she felt whole. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For making me feel like I matter." Shin Dae-young tightened his arms around her. "You have always mattered, Chioma. Even before I walked into that church. You just needed someone to remind you." She closed her eyes and let herself sink into the warmth of his embrace, and she thought that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. But of course, nothing was ever that simple. The next morning, Chioma woke up to the sound of shouting. She sat up in bed, disoriented and confused, and realized that she was alone. Shin Dae-young was gone, and the shouting was coming from somewhere else in the penthouse. She got out of bed and pulled on one of Shin Dae-young's shirts, which hung down to her thighs, and she walked cautiously out into the hallway. The shouting was coming from the living room, and as she got closer, she could make out words. Two men were arguing in Korean, their voices raised and angry. One of them was Shin Dae-young. Chioma stopped at the entrance to the living room and peered around the corner. Shin Dae-young was standing in the middle of the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and there was another man with him. The other man was also Korean, older, with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He was gesturing wildly, his face red with anger, and Shin Dae-young was responding in a low, controlled voice that somehow sounded more dangerous than the older man's shouting. The older man said something that made Shin Dae-young's expression darken, and then he turned and stormed toward the door. He stopped when he saw Chioma standing there, and his eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. He said something in Korean, his tone mocking, and then he brushed past her and left the penthouse, slamming the door behind him. Chioma walked into the living room, and Shin Dae-young turned to look at her. His expression was thunderous, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. "Who was that?" she asked. "No one important." "He seemed important." Shin Dae-young sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "He is part of my organization. He does not approve of my recent choices." "You mean me?" "Yes." Chioma wrapped her arms around herself. "What did he say?" "It does not matter. It matters to me." Shin Dae-young looked at her, and she saw something flicker across his face. "Guilt, maybe. Or regret." "He said that I am making a mistake. That bringing you into my life puts both of us in danger. That I am letting my emotions cloud my judgment." "Is he right? About the danger?" "Yes." "About my judgment?" "No." Chioma walked over to him and placed a hand on his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palm. "Tell me the truth, Dae-young. Am I in danger because of you?" He covered her hand with his own. "There are people who would hurt you to get to me. That is the reality of my life. I have enemies, Chioma. Dangerous enemies. And now that they know you exist, now that they know you matter to me, you are a target." Her blood ran cold. "Then maybe I should leave." "No." His grip on her hand tightened. If you leave, they will still know about you. They will still see you as a way to hurt me. The only way to keep you safe is to keep you close. To make sure that everyone knows that anyone who touches you will have to answer to me. That sounds like a threat. It is a promise. Chioma looked up at him, at the fierce determination in his eyes, and she made a choice. She could run. She could leave this penthouse and go back to her normal life and pretend that none of this had ever happened. Or she could stay. She could take the risk. She could choose to be with a man who was dangerous and complicated, and who made her feel more alive than she had felt in years. Okay, she said. I'll stay. But you have to promise me something. Anything. You have to be honest with me. No more half-truths. No more vague answers. If I'm going to be in your world, I need to know what I'm dealing with. Shin Dae-young nodded slowly. I promise. And so he told her. He told her about his organization, about the businesses they ran, and the territories they controlled. He told her about the rivals who wanted to take what he had built, about the constant power struggles and the violence that sometimes erupted. He told her about the people who worked for him, about their loyalty and their code. He told her about the line he walked between legal and illegal, about the choices he had made and the things he had done that he was not proud of. And he told her about the danger, about the very real possibility that someone might try to hurt her to get to him. When he was finished, Chioma sat in silence, processing everything he had said. It was overwhelming and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She should be running. She should be calling the police. She should be doing anything except staying here with a man who had just admitted to being a criminal. But she did not run. She looked at Shin Dae-young, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the way he was waiting for her to reject him, and she felt something shift inside her. This man had saved her when no one else had. He had protected her and respected her and made her feel valued. He was not perfect. He was not safe. But he was real. And that was more than she had ever gotten from Trevor. I'm still staying, she said. Shin Dae-young let out a breath that sounded like relief. Are you sure? I'm sure. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, and Chioma closed her eyes and let herself believe that everything would be okay. Even though she knew deep down that it would not be that simple. But for now, in this moment, wrapped in the arms of a man who had chosen her when no one else had, she was willing to take that risk. Because for the first time in her life, she was choosing herself. And that was worth fighting for. Over the weeks and months that followed, Chioma learned what it meant to live in Shin Dae-young's world. She learned to read the signs of danger, learned to trust her instincts, learned to navigate the complex web of loyalty and power that defined his life. She met the people who worked for him, and she earned their respect by showing them that she was not just some fragile thing that needed to be protected. She was strong. She was capable. She was Shin Dae-young's equal, not his possession. There were threats. There were attempts. There was a night when men broke into the penthouse, and she fought them off with nothing but her wits and a kitchen knife until Shin Dae-young arrived. There was a betrayal by someone close to him, someone she had trusted, and she watched as Shin Dae-young dealt with it in a way that was brutal and final. There were moments when she questioned her choice, when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But there were also moments of peace. Quiet mornings when she woke up in Shin Dae-young's arms. Evenings when they cooked dinner together, laughing at her attempts to pronounce Korean words correctly. Nights when he held her close and whispered promises into her hair. Promises that he would always protect her, always choose her, always love her. And slowly, over time, Chioma fell in love. Not with the idea of being saved, not with the fantasy of a dangerous man who would protect her from the world. She fell in love with Shin Dae-young himself, with the man beneath the armor, with the vulnerability he showed only to her. She fell in love with the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world. She fell in love with the way he listened to her, really listened, and valued her opinion. She fell in love with the way he made her feel seen and heard and valued in a way that Trevor never had. One night, about 6 months after the wedding that had started it all, Chioma and Shin Dae-young were sitting on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the city lights. It was a clear night, and the stars were visible despite the light pollution. Shin Dae-young had his arm around her, and Chioma was leaning against him, feeling content in a way that she had not felt in a very long time. I have something for you, Shin Dae-young said. Chioma looked up at him. What is it? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He opened it, and inside was a ring. It was simple and elegant, a single diamond set in platinum, and it took Chioma's breath away. I know we got married under strange circumstances, Shin Dae-young said. I know it was not the wedding you wanted or the marriage you planned. But I want to do this right. I want to ask you properly if you will stay with me. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Not because you are afraid. But because you choose to. Because you love me the way I love you. Chioma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. You love me? I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing at that altar, refusing to chase after a man who did not deserve you, Shin Dae-young said. I have loved you through every moment since. And I will love you for every moment that comes after. So Chioma, will you marry me? Again. For real this time. Chioma laughed through her tears. We're already married. Then will you stay married to me? She looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life they had built together in the midst of chaos and danger. She thought about everything she had been through, everything she had survived, everything she had become. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. Yes, she said. I will. Shin Dae-young slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. And as they sat there on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, Chioma felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she was home. The months that followed were not easy. There were more threats, more danger, more moments when Chioma feared for both of their lives. Shin Dae-young's rivals grew bolder, and there was a particularly brutal confrontation that ended with Shin Dae-young doing something shocking and violent to protect her, something that she knew would haunt him even as it saved her life. There were nights when he could not sleep, when the weight of his choices pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. And Chioma was there, holding him, reminding him that he was not alone, that she had chosen him knowing exactly who he was. Trevor faded into the background, a footnote in a story that had moved on without him. Chioma heard through mutual friends that he had tried to reach out several times, that he had been genuinely devastated when he realized what he had lost. But she felt nothing when she heard these things. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering pain. Just a mild curiosity about a man who had once been important to her, but now felt like a stranger. Her family slowly came around. It took time, and there were arguments and tears and long, difficult conversations. But eventually, they saw that Chioma was happy, that she was safe, that she had made a choice and was living with the consequences in a way that was honest and brave. Her mother never fully understood, but she accepted it. And that was enough. 1 year after the wedding, Chioma stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom she now shared with Shin Dae-young, looking at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. This woman was stronger, more confident, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. This woman had survived humiliation and danger, and had come out the other side not broken, but forged into something new. Shin Dae-young came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. What are you thinking about? He asked. About how different my life is now, Chioma said. About how a year ago, I was standing at an altar in a wedding dress, watching my life fall apart. And now I'm standing here with you. And I'm happier than I ever thought I could be. Shin Dae-young turned her around to face him. He cupped her face in his hands and looked into her eyes with that same intensity that had stopped her from chasing Trevor out of the church a year ago. I love you, Chioma. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I don't regret it, Chioma said. Not for a single moment. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of the love that had grown between them over the past year. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Chioma knew that this was her real wedding. Not the public spectacle in the church. Not the desperate grab at dignity in the face of humiliation. This quiet moment of choosing each other, knowing all the flaws and dangers and complications, and choosing each other anyway. Their life was not perfect. It was messy and complicated and sometimes dangerous. But it was theirs, and that made it beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know what you think. Was Shin Dae-young right to step in the way he did? Did he go too far by bringing Chioma into his dangerous world? What do you think should happen next for them? Should Trevor have gotten a second chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one. Share this with someone who loves a good romance, and I'll see you in the next one.